We all want to be in the know, right? I mean, to really grasp these complex topics without drowning in an ocean of information. That's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep on something particularly fascinating. Self-deception.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's really remarkable how much research is out there exploring why we humans so often overestimate our abilities and knowledge. And we're going to unpack that today. Uncover some of the surprising ways this tendency shapes our lives for better or worse. We'll even touch on some ways you might become a little more aware of your own blind spots.
You know, it makes me think of that classic saying, know thyself. Pretty basic stuff. But there's a more modern and maybe even funnier way to think about all this. Thanks to Garrison Keillor and his fictional town, Lake Wobegon, you remember?
Oh, yeah, the town where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.
Right. It's so funny because it's statistically impossible.
Uh-huh.
But as Keillor himself pointed out, that fictional town resonated with so many people.
Exactly. And that's because it illustrates this really common thing that psychologists call illusory superiority, or the above average effect.
And it's everywhere. The research we've been looking at is just full of examples, like take something as basic as our own health.
Most people think they're healthier than average. They even think they're going to live longer than average.
And driving. I mean, this is great. Over 90% of people think they're better than average drivers.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Just let that sink in for a second.
It's wild. Clearly, this isn't just about one or two things. We see this bias across so many different skills and traits.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, think about social skill.
You know, like leadership or something.
Exactly. Most students actually rate themselves as above average in leadership. A good chunk even put themselves in the top 1%.
Wow.
And then there's our social circles. People tend to believe they have more friends than their peers do. And then we look at performance, in school or at work, and we see the same patterns popping up again and again.
Right. So we're talking like most students thinking they're smarter than their classmates.
Yep. And university faculty thinking they're better teachers than their colleagues. Lawyers think they'll win most of their cases. Stock traders think they're going to beat the market. It's like this constant overestimation.
So what's the real cost of all this? Does it actually hold us back from learning and improving? Or does it actually serve some kind of necessary social function, even if it is statistically kind of crazy?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting is just how many things we tend to be, overly optimistic about when it comes to ourselves.
Oh, totally. Like, it's not just about skills.
It assists there.
It extends to things like our income, how attractive we think we are, how happy we are, even our technical abilities, our biological strengths and weaknesses, and maybe most importantly, our moral character.
And this isn't just something we keep to ourselves, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, we actively try to project this above average image. Just think about what you see on social media.
It's true. How often do you see people posting about their failures or their shortcomings? Not very often, right?
Yep.
It's usually all about our best selves. A carefully curated highlight reel.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that too. And it even affects how we explain our successes and failures, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We usually take credit for our wins, saying it's because of our talent and hard work. But when things go wrong, we often blame outside factors or other people.
It's so true. Like, you hear these phrases like mistakes were made, which completely avoids taking any personal responsibility. It's almost like blaming a past version of yourself,
Oh, that was the old me, but this new me is much better.
Exactly. So clever, isn't it?
Yeah, a sneaky way to avoid the blame game.
For sure.
Yeah.
The research even touched on this kind of interesting narcissistic tendency when it comes to how we see ourselves.
Like what?
Well, most people prefer their mirror image over photographs.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
And it's interesting because that mirror image is the one we see most often, right?
Makes sense.
And studies have even shown that we're also faster to recognize digitally enhanced pictures of ourselves, versions of ourselves that are more attractive.
So we like the prettier version of ourselves better.
Yeah, it really shows how much our internal self-image can actually be different from reality.
And this isn't just some personal quirk. It can actually influence bigger societal trends.
Yeah.
Like the sources mentioned Mitt Romney's Join the 1% slogan.
Oh, right.
Even though, mathematically speaking, most voters couldn't possibly be in the top 1%, the slogan probably aimed to tap into that feeling of aspiration, that sense of hey, maybe I could be part of that elite group.
For sure. And that morale-boosting function is a big part of many campaign slogans. Whether or not they're actually accurate, they play on this desire to feel like we're part of something successful, something above average. But like we've already said, statistically, most people just can't be above average.
Okay, so let's dig into this a bit more, because this whole overestimation thing isn't just some vague feeling, right? There's some serious research backing it up, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, it comes from this really important study done in 1999 by David Dunning and Justin Kruger. They were working with psychology undergrads, and they had them estimate their abilities in areas like humor, grammar, and logic. But here's the catch. They had to do it before getting any feedback on how well they actually did.
Interesting. So what happened?
Okay, so the students who did the worst, I'm talking the bottom quarter of the group, they significantly overestimated their skills. They thought they were way better than they actually were, overrating themselves by like a whopping 45%.
So the worst performers were the most confident.
Right, it's crazy, isn't it? And this led to the idea of what's called meta-ignorance.
Meta-ignorance.
Which basically means being clueless about your own cluelessness. You know, like Dunning himself called it a double burden.
Double burden, how so?
Well, not only are you bad at something, but you're also totally unaware of just how bad you actually are.
Ouch.
Which, of course, means you're not going to even try to get better.
Right, so it's not just being bad at parallel parking. It's truly believing you're great at it and never bothering to practice or ask for help.
Exactly.
So they don't know what they don't know.
It's like a never-ending cycle.
Okay, but this brings up a really important question. If self-deception can lead to such, well, inaccurate self-assessments, why do we do it? What could possibly be the evolutionary advantage?
That's exactly the kind of question that evolutionary biologist Robert Travers started exploring back in the 80s. Because, yeah, self-deception clearly has its downsides. Think about misunderstandings in relationships, bad decisions that lead to failure, even conflicts on a bigger scale. For something so common to stick around throughout evolution, Travers figured there's got to be some serious biological benefit.
Okay, so what was his main theory? Like, what could possibly outweigh all those potential problems?
Well, Travers basically thought that we lie to ourselves the better to lie to others. Think about it. When we're consciously trying to deceive someone, we often give ourselves away.
Like how?
You know, with subtle cues, a little hesitation, or a fleeting expression. Lying takes mental effort.
You know, that reminds me of the example in the sources about that couple whose baby tragically died. The husband's language shifted subtly, and he started using past tense when talking about the child without even realizing it.
It's a perfect example. That little slip-up really shows how much brain power it takes to keep up a lie, even to yourself. But if you genuinely believe your own lies, that mental load just disappears. Your expressions, your actions, they all match up naturally with the fake story you're telling, making it way more believable to others.
So basically, we become better liars by fooling ourselves first. That's kind of sneaky.
I know, right? And there's even research showing what's happening in the brain during this process. When people see themselves in a super positive light, studies show more activity in a part of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex.
That's a mouthful.
I know. But meanwhile, the parts of the brain that deal with things like self-control and recognizing mistakes, they actually quiet down. It's fascinating.
Wow, so there are actual physical changes in the brain linked to these psychological tendencies. And that really brings us back to just how common the Dunning-Kruger effect seems to be. I mean, it's not just about those undergrads in that one study. It shows up in so many different areas.
Oh, absolutely. Reading comprehension, gun safety, general knowledge about research, medical diagnoses, tech skills, athletics. People in all sorts of fields tend to overestimate their abilities. And this has real-world consequences, you know, for how we judge the quality of things and the services we rely on every day.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, how many times have we gotten advice or services from someone who was totally clueless about their own limitations? It's a scary thought. But okay, so the research makes it clear that self-deception isn't all bad, right? There are some potential upsides.
Definitely. One big benefit is that it helps us create a more positive self-image, which can do wonders for our self-esteem and confidence. Think about all the ways we try to enhance how we look.
Like makeup, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. From something simple like makeup to more serious things like cosmetic surgery, even the stuff we buy like gadgets or cars. It's all about projecting a certain image to ourselves and others.
And now with social media and all the photo editing tools, we can really curate our own online image.
Exactly. It's like everyone's building their own digital Lake Wobegon online.
That's a great way to put it. And this goes beyond just our physical or digital selves, right?
Right. Self-deception also shapes how we see reality itself. Like the way information is framed can totally change how we interpret it. Remember that classic example saying something is 95% fat-free versus saying it has 5% fat?
Yeah, it sounds so much better when you say it's fat-free.
I know, right? It's the same thing, but it just feels different. Or think about how much the price of a bottle of wine can affect how good we think it tastes.
It's amazing how easily we can be swayed. And then there's the whole power of language.
Like euphemisms.
Yeah. You know those words or phrases that soften harsh realities? The sources gave some really interesting examples, like shifting from anti-abortion to pro-life, or changing global warming to something that sounds less scary, like climate change.
It's incredible how these small but powerful shifts in language can change our whole understanding of things. And our emotional response, too, especially when it comes to these complex and controversial issues.
Absolutely.
But, while self-deception can be good for our self-esteem, it also has a darker side. It can make us prideful, prejudiced, and resistant to facts. We might even flat out deny reality if it doesn't fit with what we want to believe.
Yeah, that study about people watching the color change on a paper strip really stood out to me. The people who are hoping for a good outcome actually stared at the strip for much longer, like they were trying to will the change to happen.
It's amazing, isn't it? It shows how our expectations and desires can really warp our perception of objective events.
Totally. And this ties into how our brains and memories aren't actually objective, like a video recording. They're wired to serve our own interests and keep our self-narrative consistent.
It's true.
This whole good old days phenomenon, remembering our successes more vividly than our failures. It's like our memories are constantly being edited to make us the heroes of our own stories.
Exactly. I love that quote from Tavris and Aronson where they said that memory is like a personal, live-in, self-justifying historian.
I love that. So true.
I know, right? And there were some really good examples in the sources, like how people tend to remember having fewer sexual partners than they actually did, or overestimating how much they've donated to charity.
Right.
Even parents misremembering when their kids reach certain milestones, thinking it happened earlier than it actually did.
It's like our brains are always trying to make us look good, even to ourselves. And it might seem harmless enough, but think about it in a more serious context, like eyewitness testimony in court.
Oh, yeah, that's when it gets really tricky, especially with child witnesses, because they can be so easily influenced.
Yeah, it's scary how easily our memories can be manipulated.
Absolutely.
And, self-deception isn't just an individual thing. It can happen on a group level, too. The sources talked about these false historical narratives.
Right. Traver's idea that whole societies can have shared beliefs that aren't true, often to make themselves look good or to strengthen group unity, like the belief that one's own country is the best, the most generous.
It's interesting, right, how this seems to be a thing in so many different countries and cultures. The sources mentioned the U.S., Russia, China, Germany, Japan. It's like this universal tendency to exaggerate how great your own group is.
And it can even connect to things like delusional thinking and superstition. Our brains are naturally wired to look for patterns and connections, even when they're not really there.
Yeah, like seeing faces in random objects or thinking that something you did caused something else to happen just because they happened close together in time. Like yelling at a slot machine to try and make it pay out, or animals developing weird superstitions based on random events.
It's like this deep-seated need to see patterns and make connections, even if they're totally false. But get this, there might actually be an upside to superstition. The sources talked about its potential for self-healing.
Self-healing, really?
Yeah, which brings us to the placebo effect. You remember that story about the Derby liquid in China? It's a great example of how believing in a treatment can make you feel better, even if the treatment itself doesn't actually do anything.
Right. Even if it's totally fake. It's like the whole ritual of going to the doctor, getting a prescription, taking a pill can all convince us that something's working.
Exactly. And that's essentially a form of self-deception.
It's amazing how our minds can have such a powerful effect on our bodies.
Yeah, it's all about the mind-body connection.
So how does the placebo effect actually work?
Well, things like Pavlovian conditioning, social learning, our memories, and our motivations can all work together to create real physical changes in our bodies. It's pretty wild.
So it's not just all in our heads.
Right. And we see the placebo effect helping with all sorts of things, from sleep and mood to reducing pain, even boosting sexual function. There's this fascinating link between hope, the release of dopamine in the brain, and how we experience pain.
And what's really mind-blowing is that placebos can actually make real medications work better.
I know. It's incredible.
And they can even work when people know they're taking a placebo.
It really shows how powerful our minds can be.
So what affects how well a placebo works?
Well, lots of things. Like how expensive or invasive the treatment seems, how much authority the doctor has, even the color of the placebo pill.
Really? The color matters.
Apparently so. It all taps into our learned associations and expectations. And you know what's really cool? Brain scans actually show changes in the brain when someone's experiencing the placebo effect.
So there are physical changes happening. That's wild.
I know. And the more we learn about the placebo effect, the more we realize that a lot of alternative medicine might actually be based on it.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, acupuncture, for example.
Oh,
Even though it's been around forever, studies haven't really shown a big difference between real acupuncture and fake acupuncture for a lot of the conditions it's used for. What seems to matter most is whether the patient believes it will help.
so it all comes back to belief.
It seems so. And this brings up this whole debate about what we consider useful in healthcare. Like, scientists say something's only useful if it works better than a placebo. But most people just care if something works, period. It makes you think right.
Yeah. So are placebos actually useful?
The sources argue that they can be, especially when there are no other good treatments available. But then we get into all these ethical questions, like, what about informed consent? Is it okay to deceive patients? What if the placebo actually causes harm?
Right. Like what if it makes them sicker?
Exactly. And then there's the risk of delaying real treatment that could actually help.
So while placebos could have some benefits, we have to be really careful about using them, especially without being totally honest with patients. But the research also suggests that self-deception can have other benefits for our mental well-being beyond just the placebo effect.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like how?
Well, it can help us feel less stressed, have higher self-esteem, and just be happier overall, even if those positive beliefs aren't entirely true.
So even if we're fooling ourselves a little, it can actually make us feel better.
Exactly. And that self-confidence and optimism, even if it's partly based on self-deception, can help us live longer, have more fulfilling lives, and even achieve more.
Okay, but there's got to be a downside to all this, right? Like, what happens when that healthy confidence turns into overconfidence? That's when things can start to go wrong.
Definitely. Like that saying, pride goes before a fall.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the sources had some great examples of this, like that story about misremembering where the Colorado state capitol is, or the person who almost drowned because they overestimated their swimming skills.
It's so easy to see how overconfidence can get us into trouble, both embarrassing and dangerous. And then there's that quiz they talked about, the esoteric deduction quiz. It was brilliant. It showed how we can claim to know stuff about things that don't even exist, especially when those things sound kind of familiar.
Right, like we use fancy jargon and we think we sound smart, even if we're talking about complete nonsense.
It's so true. It's like we overestimate how much we understand about everyday stuff, like how a lock works or the mechanics of a toilet, even basic things like personal finance. And don't even get me started on sports fans who think they could coach their team better than the pros.
Oh man, don't get me started on that. But seriously though, overconfidence can be really dangerous in certain professions.
No,
like,
absolutely. Especially jobs where good judgment and expertise are crucial, like in medicine, finance, or law. If people overestimate their abilities in those fields, the consequences can be huge. And then there's overconfidence on a global scale, which has played a part in so many wars and disasters throughout history.
the examples in the sources were pretty sobering. Napoleon's invasion of Russia, Germany's mistakes in the world wars, the U.S. in Vietnam.
And more recently, all the assumptions about how the war in Ukraine would play out. It seems like a lot of those decisions were driven, at least in part, by leaders overestimating their own power and underestimating their opponents.
Yeah, it's really scary when you think about it.
It is. And so what causes this overconfidence? Well, hormones seem to play a role. Testosterone, for example, has been linked to risk-taking and overconfidence, especially in men. Some studies even suggest it affects how CEOs make decisions and can contribute to stock market instability.
Really?
Yeah. And interestingly, statistics show that men actually tend to do worse than women when it comes to stock trading, on average.
Interesting. So overconfidence can make us closed-minded, right? And it makes us less likely to accept good advice, like those examples in the sources about smokers ignoring health warnings and people avoiding HIV tests because they think they're not at risk. It's like they're in denial.
Totally. And this is where this thing called confirmation bias comes in.
Confirmation bias, what's that?
It's this cognitive bias where we look for and favor information that already supports our beliefs while ignoring stuff that contradicts them. It's a really powerful force that keeps us stuck in our self-deceptions and protects our egos from uncomfortable truths.
And how does that play out in the real world?
Well, that story about the OneCoin cryptocurrency scam is a perfect example. People wanted so badly to believe in this Bitcoin killer that they ignored all the warning signs and even attacked anyone who tried to point out the obvious flaws in the whole thing.
All right.
It's a classic case of wanting something to be true so much that you shut down any kind of rational thinking. And, with the internet and all these algorithms that personalize our online experience, it's getting even easier to fall into these traps. We're constantly being fed information that confirms what we already believe.
So it's like being stuck in an echo chamber where everyone agrees with you all the time. And of course, this leads to the spread of misinformation, like Goebbels' idea that if you repeat a lie often enough, people will start to believe it. But I think exploiting confirmation bias is even more effective and sneaky.
I agree. Like those feel-good ideologies and the echo chambers they create, like QAnon, they thrive in this kind of environment. And once people are sucked into these echo chambers, it's really hard to change their minds, even when you present them with facts and evidence. The whole vaccine autism thing is a perfect example.
It's like they're totally cut off from any other perspectives.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual beliefs. These echo chambers can amplify misinformation on a massive scale. Studies show that false information, especially if it's new and surprising, can spread much faster online than the truth. And a small number of people can have a huge impact. Think about all the fake news that spread during the 2016 election, or all the misinformation about COVID vaccines. It's terrifying.
Absolutely. It makes it impossible to have a reasonable conversation or debate. Instead of listening to each other and considering different viewpoints, people just dig in their heels and become even more convinced they're right. And this can be really dangerous during a crisis.
Yeah, like when things are really tough, denying reality can be a way to cope, but it can also prevent us from taking the necessary steps to actually deal with the problem.
It's so true. And sadly, this is often exploited in politics and by media companies. They're more interested in getting our attention and making money than they are in telling the truth. It's led to this crazy politicization of everything, and we're constantly bombarded with biased news and false narratives.
I agree. It's hard to know what to believe anymore.
Right. Which brings us back to this whole idea of self-ignorance. That quote from Nietzsche really hits home. How much truth can a spirit bear? How much truth can a spirit dare? That has become, for me, the real measure of value.
It's such a powerful quote.
It really makes you think about how much we actually know about ourselves.
For sure. And the Dunning-Kruger effect kind of explains why the people who know the least are often the most confident. It's because they lack the knowledge to even recognize their own incompetence.
It's a real catch-22, isn't it?
It is. And as Richard Feynman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
So how do we avoid fooling ourselves?
Well, the Dunning-Kruger study actually offers a clue. They found that the people who performed really well on the tasks tended to underestimate their abilities. And the people who were more secure in their self-assessment were also more open to hearing different perspectives. So it seems like humility and being open to feedback are key.
The sources had a bunch of great quotes about humility and self-awareness, like, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." And there is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your former self.
I love those quotes. And honestly, getting honest feedback from others is one of the best ways to break through our own self-deceptions. It's not always easy to hear, but it can be so valuable. Of course, we have to be careful about how we approach people who seem to be exhibiting the Dunning-Kruger effect. Starting with praise and framing criticism positively can be a lot more effective than just telling them they're wrong.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the sources also brought up this interesting point about gender differences in self-perception.
Oh yeah, what about that?
Well, research suggests that women are actually more realistic in their self-assessments and are more likely to downplay their abilities compared to men, who often overestimate theirs.
So maybe what's often seen as self-doubt in women is actually a strength.
Exactly. Those qualities we admire in wise people, like modesty, humility, and healthy skepticism, might actually help women see reality more clearly and make better decisions, which is obviously super important in leadership roles.
Like that example of California pushing for more women on company boards back in the 90s, and then those companies ended up performing better financially.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
And that meta-analysis showed that companies with more women in sales and on their boards also tend to do better.
It suggests that women might be particularly good at making decisions in collaborative settings, but it's important not to overgeneralize.
Of course.
Like that example of Carly Fiorina reminds us that just having women in leadership doesn't guarantee success.
Right, right.
The research seems to point to the idea that a good mix of men and women in leadership roles might be the best way to balance confidence and self-awareness. And it's worth noting that women are still underrepresented in top leadership positions in many industries.
So much to think about.
I know, right?
Well, we've really explored this fascinating phenomenon of self-deception. We've talked about its evolutionary origins, how it shows up in our lives, its potential benefits, and its dangers. We've looked at how our brains can trick us, how we can trick ourselves, and how these tendencies affect us personally and shape our societies.
And at the end of the day, it's about understanding these two laws of cognitive cheating, as you might
Right.
call it. The tendency to make stuff up in our own minds and then exploit the loopholes in our thinking.
Right.
By becoming more aware of how these things work, we can hopefully start to recognize our own blind spots and move towards a more accurate understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So as you go about your day today, maybe take a moment to think about the areas in your own life where self-deception might be playing a role. Could you benefit from being more aware of these biases? Could it help you see yourself more clearly and make better decisions?